And welcome to the video lecture on how to create a table in Microsoft Access 2010. I'm basically starting off from where I left off with the create database example. In this case, as soon as you create a blank database, you are confronted by this blank table. So here you can see that we have a tab up here called Table 1. We have a table listed on the left called Table 1. This display is known as Data Sheet. Okay, you can change the displays in the upper left by using this icon. This icon is actually a toggle. So if you click directly on the icon, it looks like a right angle, a pencil, and a ruler. You will switch to what's known as Design View. You can see because Data Sheet is highlighted, the square is highlighted, or the grid looking icon is highlighted, so that we are, for our purposes, you will not be using this view to create your tables. So we're going to switch to Design View. When we switch to Design View, we need to save the table. So I'm going to call this Student, right? And click OK. I'm basically going to go through this the way I normally would for a university database. So field name ID isn't going to work, so we're going to use student ID. So we have student ID. Auto number is the data type you are going to use for all of your primary keys. Student ID is going to be the primary key. This table started out with this setting, so you know what? I'll show you how to do that in subsequent tables. But there's a button up here that actually says primary key in the menu, right next to the toggle button for the view that says primary key. You can see how it's highlighted. So this is the primary key. The auto number field will auto increment. In other words, it'll start at 1 and it'll auto increment. If you look down at the bottom in the field properties, you see that the field size is long integer. The new values is just increment, and by default it'll increment by 1. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, ad nauseum. So all we do is we click down below student ID. So student ID is done. So now below that, we would call this student first name, depending on our naming conventions. Now it defaults to text, but if you drop down the data type, you can pick any of the other data types. The only ones that we're really going to be using are text, number, date, time. You might use currency. We're certainly going to be using auto number, and we're going to be using yes, no, and that's basically what's otherwise known as a Boolean. It's either yes or it's no. Student first name, we have a description area. So if you remember from the ER Assistant, you can go into here and put a description of what this column is supposed to be. Down on the bottom in the field properties, you can see the field size. This is where you would put like varchar 20, and you would say that there are 20 characters. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight field size. We're going to change that to 20 characters. All right. Not going to get into formatting or input mask or caption right now. We'll talk about that later on. And we'll do default values. We'll do all of those kinds of field properties explanations in a different video. One of the things that you want to do is the required is the same thing as null and not null. So in this case, we're definitely going to say that this is a required field, right? If you double click it, it toggles it between yes and no. So if I double click this again, it changes to no. I double click it again, it goes back to yes. So this is a required field. We have to put in a student name. So this is, for all intents and purposes, saying that this is not null. And then in the allow zero length, I'm not going to talk about this right now. I'll talk about this in a different video, but we always change that to no. And I'll explain that in a different video. Now I'm going to click back up top, and I'm going to make student last name. All right, if I hit the tab key, it goes over to the data type. Again, it's going to be text. I'm going to go down to the bottom. I'm going to change the field size to 20 again. Again, this is based on your business rules. I'm going to say that last name is required, and I always change the allow zero length to no. Okay, we can make a field something like is registered, for instance, and in that case, if we hit a Y on the keyboard, it brings up the default value 0 means that it defaults to being false or no. All right, so if you look down here at the bottom, that default value, we're going to leave that as 0. Most of the time, we're going to be leaving the defaults. Let's see, we can put in something like registered date. And I'm doing this just so you can see how to make the different fields. So I'm going to say, I'm going to hit D, which brings us right to date time. Right? If you're wondering why or how it went without actually dropping it down, if you just hit the first letter when you're in the data type column, if you hit the first letter, it brings up that data type. And date time is pretty straightforward. Registration fee, we can drop that down and make that currency, right? Things of that nature, right? Maybe GPA. Now, this is going to be a number. And now it's very important to go down to field size because a GPA is not an integer. It has a decimal value to it. So I'm going to change that and I'm going to make that a single. And then I'm going to say how many decimal places it is. Instead of leaving it auto, I'm going to say there are 2 decimal places. All right. You could put in a default value of 0, something like that. But that's an example of how to create a table. So now let's create another table. So we have student, right? So all I'm going to do is hit the X to close it. I'll get a dialog box asking me to save the changes. Eventually, I'm going to say yes. So now let's do, so now to create another table, see now, wait, how am I going to create another table? So up here, there's a tab called Create. So we have the File tab, which is mauve or purple, whatever that color is. Then we have the Home tab, and then we've got the Create tab. In the Create tab, we're going to click on Table Design. So we click on Table Design. Now we're back in mode. So now let's make this the offering table. So we're going to have offering ID. We're going to make that auto number, right? So if I hit an A, it brings it to auto number. We want this to be the primary key. So again, back up here in the menu, we're going to click on primary key, and that's how that little key icon shows up in the offer, right next to offering ID. So that's the auto number. I'm going to say offering term. We can leave that as text because that's going to be summer, spring. Going to go down to field size, change that to 10. We're going to make that required. We're going to change the allow 0 length. And then we're going to have offering year. Again, that's going to be text. You could make it a number, doesn't really matter. I'm just going to make it text 4. So if I go down to field size, I change that to 4. It's going to be required, and allow 0 length is going to be no. And that's fine. Right? So now if I go over here, I can close, or up here at the very top, I have a little save disk. So I can either just close the table over here, or click save. In this case, I'm going to close table 1. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to call it offering. Okay, now I want to create one more table just to show you how to make an associative entity table. So we're going to go to Table Design, right? In this case, this is going to be enrollment, so I'm going to make enrollment ID. It's going to be an auto number. Now I can make that the primary key, right? And then underneath this, I can have student ID. Now, auto number is an integer, right? So that's going to be numeric. and in this case it's always long integer, right? So when you make a student ID, it's going to be a foreign key. Now here you might want to say, you know, foreign key to student table, something like that in the description. Then we can have offering ID, which is also going to be numeric. Okay, it's going to be a long integer. So remember, and then the last thing that we're going to have in here is grade. We can leave that and leave that as text to make it too wide. Can be required, and no. So student ID. All right, we want to make sure that we made that required. Offering ID, we're going to make sure that that's required, right at the bottom. Grade, we've already set that up. So as you can see, when you have different types, different data types, you're going to have different field properties down at the bottom. All right, so if I do auto number, that's going to be different than number. That's going to be different than text. That's going to be different than yes, no's. That's going to be different than date times. All right, so you're going to see different field properties at the bottom. So remember, there are two ways of doing an associative entity. Either you can create the enrollment, right, like that, as the auto number, the enrollment ID, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck the primary key. These boxes, if you click on the boxes all the way to the left, those little gray boxes, those are row selectors. Okay, if I click on field name, that would be, actually there aren't column selectors when you're in design mode. So these are row selectors, so I'm going to click on the row selector associated with enrollment ID and hit the delete, and click on delete rows. Alright, it's going to give you a warning that it's going to delete one or more indexes because that used to be the primary key, so we're going to click yes. And then in order to make, so then the other way of doing this is making a compound primary key. And the way you do that is you highlight, you click and you drag, right, the row selector. So I click on the row selector for student ID and I drag down, and now I have student ID and offering ID, both of them are highlighted, and now I'm going to click the primary key. So now I get that little yellow key next to both student ID and offering ID. You notice that by doing that, it automatically makes them required. You may or may not notice that because we changed that before. But making something a primary key will automatically make it required. All right, and then we can close that. Say yes, and this is going to be our enrollment table. Wow, I'm going to learn how to type one of these years. All right. So that's how you create 3 normal tables and associative entity, and that'll be the end of this video.